He'd given up on 12 lost horses. Then a woman rode up with all of them. The last thing I expected to see coming down the switchback that morning was my own horses. I'd been sitting on the porch step with a cold cup of coffee, watching the trail because there was nothing else to watch and I hadn't slept. 3 days since the storm hit the upper pasture. 3 days since I'd ridden every draw and gully from here to the Sulphur Creek Fork and come back empty each time, saddle sore and stupider for the effort. The horses were gone. 12 of them, the whole breeding string I'd spent 11 years building, the only thing on this ranch worth the word valuable. Gone into that white wall of snow and wind, and not one of them had the sense or the luck to come down on their own. I'd stopped looking the evening before, just stopped, pulled off my boots and set them by the door and decided that was the end of it. I don't say that to make myself sound beaten, though I was. I say it because a man gets to a certain point where the arithmetic just stops working. 53 years old, both knees shot, a ranch that barely cleared enough in a good year to keep the roof sound, and now no horses. The arithmetic doesn't work. You set your boots by the door and you let it be. There's a particular quiet that comes over a place when you stop fighting it. I'd felt it once before, years ago, during the bad stretch when I'd had to sell down to the studs. Same feeling. Like the land itself goes still because it's waiting to see what you'll do, except you've already decided and there's nothing to do. You just sit. The cold comes in under the door. The coffee goes cold in the cup. I sat there for a long time before the light came up. I watched the gray grow in the east and I thought about practical things. What the horses would have been worth at spring sale, whether there was a neighbor I could approach about buying breeding rights to their stallion for one season to get anything from the mares I still had in the small pasture, whether the ranch was a going concern at all without the string. I ran the numbers in my head and they ran badly. My wife Margaret had sat in this same kitchen 20 years ago and run numbers with me during the first bad stretch before she got sick. She'd been better at numbers than I was, steadier. She didn't panic and she didn't pretend either. She'd look at the thing straight and tell you what was actually there. I'd learned more about my own ranch from how she read a ledger than I ever learned on my own. She was gone 15 years now, and I still missed the way she read a ledger. That was the kind of morning it was, sitting on the step with the cold cup, thinking about numbers and about Margaret, and about whether 53 is too old to start over a second time, and fairly sure the answer was yes. Then I heard them. You know the sound. If you've worked horses your whole life you know it without thinking, hooves on rock, but spread out, not one animal, not two, a whole string moving together, the particular scatter of it. I heard it before I saw anything and my body went ahead of my mind. I was standing before I decided to stand, the cold cup still in my hand. They came around the bend in the trail single file, bunched a little at the front where the path narrows, and I counted them as they cleared the rock face. 1, 2, 3. I got to 8 before I stopped counting and started trying to understand what I was seeing behind them. A woman, on a gray mule, the kind of ugly, hard-headed mule that makes the best sense in mountain country and the worst impression anywhere else. She was riding easy, not working hard, like she'd been doing this all morning and expected to do it all afternoon. A duster coat that had seen weather. Hair pulled back and mostly covered by a hat that wasn't hers, too large, sitting low on her ears. One hand loose on the reins, the other resting on her thigh, holding a coiled rope the way someone holds it who's used one before and will probably need it again. She drove those horses right into my front yard and stopped them there like she'd been to this place before, though she hadn't. I could tell by the way she looked at the house, quick, measuring, taking it in. I finished counting, 12. She looked at me, "These yours?" I said they were. Found them in a box canyon up past the second ridge. The big sorrel mare had herself wedged between two rock faces, hind leg caught in a crack. Had to work her out slow. That's what took the morning. I didn't say anything. I was still counting, which was foolish because I'd already counted, but I kept doing it. "They're sound," she said. "The mare'll need watching for a day or two. That leg isn't broke, but she was pulling against it a while before I got there." I finally got my mouth working. "How'd you know they were mine?" She nodded toward the south pasture gate. There was a brand plate nailed to the post, the same mark on every animal in that string. "Wasn't hard to figure," she said. Her name was Nora Voss, and she was 29 days out of St. Louis. That's the piece of information that took me longest to make sense of. 29 days. She'd come west with a party of women heading for the valley settlements, bride-seekers mostly, organized by a land company that had promised them rancher husbands and fresh starts. The party had broken up at the Bitterroot crossing. One wagon lost a wheel beyond fixing. 2 women decided to turn back when the pass showed snow, and the rest scattered to different routes depending on who they'd agreed to meet and where. Nora wasn't meeting anyone. She told me this matter-of-factly, like it was a practical detail, and not the kind of thing that would make most people look at her differently. She'd signed on with the party for the company and the safety of numbers, but she wasn't promised to anyone in particular. She had the name of a woman in Caldwell Wells who ran a dry goods store and had written that she needed a partner who could keep books and wasn't afraid of long hours. That was where Nora was headed. Another 4 days' ride, she figured, maybe 5 if the weather turned again. I brought the horses into the south pasture while she watered the mule. She did it without asking where the water was, just found the trough, led the mule to it, let him drink. Checked his feet while he drank, looking for stone bruising. She was practical with animals the way a person gets from growing up with them, not the way they get from reading about them. I got the sorrel mare into the small paddock by herself and checked the leg. She'd been right. There was swelling from the knee down, but nothing broken. The mare was putting weight on it, which was the thing to watch. I stood in the paddock for a while just looking at her, at all 12 of them, at the fact of them being here when an hour ago I'd decided they were gone. She stayed for supper because I asked her to, and because the light was already going, and there was no good reason to push a mule 4 more hours in the cold when there was a barn and a warm stove available. That's the practical version. The true version includes the fact that I asked her twice before she agreed, and the way she looked at the barn before she looked at the house told me she was making sure the animals would be all right before she thought about herself. I made what I had, which wasn't much salt pork and cornbread, and the last of a jar of pickled beets that I'd been saving for no particular reason. She ate everything and didn't comment on it one way or the other, which I respected. Some people make a performance of eating plain food, especially women who didn't expect plain food. She didn't. We sat at the table after, and she drank coffee and I drank coffee, and we talked about the horses mostly. The condition of the upper pasture, whether I'd had horses scatter before in a storm and how long they'd stayed out. I told her about the breeding program, what I was working toward with the bloodlines. The mare I'd paid too much for 4 years ago because I knew what she'd throw and I'd been right about it. Nora listened the way people listen when they actually want to know something, not the way they listen when they're being polite. She asked good questions, not showy questions, practical ones. She knew something about horses, not a horsewoman's knowledge exactly, but a working knowledge, the kind you get from being around working animals your whole life and paying attention. She'd grown up on a farm in Illinois, she said. Horses and mules both. I asked her what brought her west. She thought about it, not hesitating but actually thinking, which was different. There was nothing left to stay for, she said. That's the honest answer. My mother died 2 years ago. The farm was sold to pay the debts. I was working in the city, keeping ledgers for a shipping company, living in a rooming house. It was a fine enough life. She paused. But it was the same day every day, and I'm not built for that. I understood that. I didn't say so, but I understood it. She slept in the spare room and was up before me in the morning, which I didn't expect. When I came out to the kitchen, she'd already been to the barn, checked the mare's leg, and come back. She told me the swelling was down and the horse was putting weight on it, which was good news. Then she asked if she could have some of the flour and salt and make proper biscuits because the cornbread last night had been fine, but she'd been thinking about biscuits. I told her to help herself to whatever she could find. She made biscuits. She also found the half-smoked ham I'd forgotten about in the cold box and sliced it thin and fried it. And there were eggs from the 3 hens I kept for no good reason except habit, and we ate better at that table than I'd eaten in 6 months. She drank her coffee black and ate without speaking much and looked out the window at the pasture while she ate, watching the horses move, studying them. "The dark chestnut gelding," she said, "he's off." I looked out. The horses were all moving around the hay I'd pitched in. "Which one?" "The one with the flaxen mane. Watch how he carries his left shoulder." I watched. She was right. There was a slight stiffness in how he stepped out on that side, nothing dramatic, something you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. "He hit something in the storm probably," I said, "running in the dark." "Probably he'll work it out." She said it casually, the way you say something you know to be true, and went back to her coffee. I didn't ask her to stay. I want to be clear about that, because what came after can sound like I planned it or maneuvered it, and I didn't. She decided on her own in her own time for her own reasons, and the fact that she did is the only part of this that I still think about when I can't sleep. What happened was the weather. Second storm of the season came in hard the afternoon she was supposed to leave. She'd loaded the mule and said her goodbyes and gotten maybe a mile down the trail when it hit, and she came back because she had enough sense not to push a mule into a mountain blizzard, and enough pride not to look upset about it. She came in shaking snow off her hat and said she supposed she'd need that spare room another night. She stayed 4 more days. In those 4 days I learned several things about Nora Voss. She didn't sleep late and she didn't leave work undone. She had a system for everything, the way she organized a kitchen, the way she kept track of what was used and what was left, the way she fixed things. On the second morning she found a crack in the mortar around the kitchen stove pipe and pointed it out to me and asked if I had the mix to fix it. I did. She watched me do it and asked one question about what I was using and why, and I could tell she was filing the answer away for later. The third day she rehung the kitchen door, which had been dragging on the sill for 2 winters. She didn't mention it before or after, just did it. I came in for the noon meal and the door moved clean. She wasn't soft. That's maybe the clearest way to say it. Not hard, not cold. She laughed when something was funny, and she could sit quiet in a room without making it feel like something was wrong. But she wasn't soft. She'd done hard things and expected to do more hard things and didn't waste time minding that. She also read. She had 2 books in her saddlebag and she'd read them both already on the trail, she said. And when she found my 3 books on the shelf above the desk, she asked if she could borrow one. I told her they weren't much: a farm almanac, a history of the territory, and a novel Margaret had brought from her mother's house, and I'd read twice because there was nothing else to read. Nora took the history of the territory and read half of it the first evening and the rest the second, and then talked about it at supper on the 3rd night. Things she'd noticed, things she had questions about. The land grant system and what it meant for the smaller ranchers, where the water rights had gotten complicated. She'd been thinking about the territory she was riding into. That was the thing. She wasn't just passing through on her way to something else. She was learning the place. The 4th night the weather broke and we sat by the stove, and I told her more about the ranch than I'd told anyone in years. The original claim, what it had looked like when I first ran cattle on it, why I'd switched to horses. The 2 years when it went badly and I'd sold down to the studs and started over. She listened to all of it and didn't say anything reassuring, which was the right call. There's nothing reassuring to say about a man selling down to the studs and starting over. It's just a thing that happened. She did say, "But you built it back." Not a question, just a statement. "Took a while," I said. "Most things do," she said. Then she asked about Margaret. I don't know why I told her I don't talk about Margaret easily, not with anyone, But I told her. The way we'd worked this place together in the early years, the way she'd read a ledger, the way the cancer had come on slow and then fast and then she was gone, the way the ranch had gotten harder after, not just because of the labor, but because when you're doing it alone, the point of it gets harder to keep track of. Nora listened to all of that. She didn't say I'm sorry, which I appreciated because I've heard I'm sorry from enough people that the words have gotten worn smooth. She said, "She sounds like she was someone worth knowing." "She was," I said. "And you've run this place 15 years without her." "I have." She nodded. And then she let it go, which was exactly the right thing. The fifth morning was clear and cold, and there was no good reason for her not to ride. She'd been in my spare room 5 days, and she had a woman waiting in Caldwell Wells and a job to get to. I fed the mule and got him ready and brought him out to the yard, and she came out of the house with her bag and tied it on. She stood by the mule for a moment. "The valley people," she said, "the ones who know you, do they think poorly of you?" It was a strange question, and I didn't answer it right away. I thought about what the honest answer was. The Denton Ranch to the south hadn't bought from me in 2 years, which was their right, but it had stung. The feed merchant in town was polite, but no longer chatty the way he used to be. When you lose a string of horses to a storm, and it's your second bad stretch in a decade, people remember. Not unkindly, mostly, just as a data point in their accounting of you. "Some do," I said. She looked at me directly. Nora had that way of looking at a person, not unkind, not judgmental, just straight, like she was reading something and wanted to read it right. "They're wrong," she said. Just that, no elaboration. She said it the way you state a fact you've had time to verify. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. She picked up the reins, didn't get on the mule yet, just held them. "I spent 5 days watching you work. You fixed 3 things without being asked. You knew the mare's leg was improving before I told you. You've kept this place running for how long?" 22 years. 22 years, she said. "On your own the last 15. "I've had help," I said, "a hand sometimes." "The place itself," she said. "The decisions, what to breed, what to sell, what to hold, you." "Yes." "They're wrong," she said again, quieter, like she was just confirming it to herself. She put her foot in the stirrup and got up on that ugly gray mule and looked down at me. "I'm going to ride to Caldwell Wells," she said. "I'm going to look at the store and talk to the woman and decide if it's what I thought it was." I said that sounded reasonable. "And then," she said, and she paused, and she looked out at the horses in the south pasture like she was buying herself a moment. "And then I might ride back and tell you what I found out, if that's something you'd want to hear." I held on to what I wanted to say and said something simpler. "I'd want to hear it." She rode out. I didn't let myself think about it too much. That sounds like a lie, but it's true. I'd gotten good over the years at not wanting things I probably couldn't have. It's a skill you develop. You put the thought in a back room and close the door on it, and you get to work, because the work is always there. I worked on the fence line for 2 days. The lower section had been needing attention since October, and I'd been finding other things to do instead, which is a habit I have when I'm avoiding the thing I'm actually thinking about. Out there in the cold with the wire stretcher and my hands going numb, it's harder to think. That's the point. I turned the sorrel mare out into the small paddock and watched her move, and she was fine, sound, no hitch in her stride. I watched the chestnut gelding, and his shoulder was already loosening up. A week more and you wouldn't know it had been stiff. The horses were good. That was something. I cleaned out the spare room and washed the bedding because it needed doing and not for any other reason. I aired the blankets on the line. Nora had left the room tidy, the bed made, the wash basin clean and dry. She'd folded the extra blanket the way Margaret used to fold it, which I noticed and then told myself was not something to read into. I cooked plain food and ate it without thinking about biscuits. On the 6th day, I rode into town for supplies. The feed merchant was his usual polite self, and I bought what I needed and loaded it, and he made conversation about the weather, which there was plenty to say about. On the way home, I passed the Holt place, which had been empty since old Cal Holt died 2 winters ago, and I noticed smoke from the chimney. Somebody had moved in or was at least looking at it. I wondered if it was one of the land company people, the ones who'd come from the east with promises and a railroad brochure. I thought about Nora's party of women, 29 days out of St. Louis. However many of them there had been, spread out now across the valley looking for what they'd been promised. The ones who'd turned back at the pass were probably back in Missouri by now, telling people it hadn't been what they thought. Nora hadn't turned back. On the 9th day, I heard the mule. I was in the barn working on a piece of harness. One of the breast straps had worn thin where it ran over the hame, and I'd been meaning to replace it before it failed, and I heard him on the trail before I saw anything. That particular shuffling walk a hard-used mule makes when he's covering ground steady but not fast, doing the miles because the miles need doing. I set the harness down and walked to the barn door. She came into the yard and stopped and looked at me, and I looked at her and she said, the store was smaller than she made it sound in her letters. I said that was often the way with letters. The books were a mess, she said. I spent 4 hours looking at them and I could see what was wrong, but the woman doesn't entirely want someone to tell her that. She wants the work done without the diagnosis. People are like that sometimes. I know. She got down from the mule. She was dusty from the road and her eyes were tired, but she was looking at me with that straight look. I told her what I saw anyway. She didn't like it, but she'll think about it. People usually do. What did you decide? About the store, she shook her head a little. It's not what I thought it was. She wants someone to do the numbers and stay quiet. That's not partnership. She paused. I've been quiet long enough. I took the mule's reins when she offered them. I did a lot of thinking on the way back, she said. I waited. You need someone, she said, not unkindly, just straight. Not a wife necessarily, or maybe yes, I don't know yet, that's a separate conversation. But this place is too much for one man to run clean, and you know that. You've been making it work, but barely. I've been making it work, I said. I know. That's not a criticism, it's an observation. She looked around at the yard, at the barn, at the south pasture, taking inventory. I kept books for 7 years. I know how to work and I'm not afraid of hard. I also know horses better than I let on the first time. I was modest because I didn't want to seem like I was applying for something I hadn't been asked about. And now I'm applying, she said. I looked at her. 29 days from St. Louis, 5 days in my spare room, 9 days on the road to Caldwell Wells and back again. Standing in my dusty yard with a tired mule and a straight look and more grit in her than most people I'd known my whole life. There's a lot you need to know about this place, I said. Show me, she said. The first week she was back, she went through the ranch ledgers. I hadn't looked at them in 8 months. That should tell you something about where my head was. She sat at the kitchen table 3 evenings in a row with the ledger open and a pencil and a piece of paper, and she didn't ask me anything until she had a clear picture of the whole thing. She worked the way she always worked, quiet, thorough, not rushing to conclusions. When she had a question, she'd mark the page and come back to it rather than break her concentration. On the 3rd evening, she told me what she'd found. She sat across from me and turned the piece of paper around so I could read it and walked me through it item by item. It wasn't as bad as I'd thought. That was the first thing she said. Then she told me what it was. The feed costs were running high because I'd been buying from the merchant in town, rather than contracting direct from the grain operation in the valley, which was cheaper by enough to matter across a full year. The breeding fees I was charging were 20% below what the Denton Ranch charged for comparable stock, and since the Dentons were the valley standard, I'd been underselling myself for 3 years without knowing it. The 2 mares I'd been planning to sell in the spring were worth more in foal than open, and if I held them through summer, I'd net better even accounting for the extra feed. She wasn't telling me I'd done things wrong. She was telling me what the numbers showed and what you could do about it. There was a difference, and she understood the difference, which Margaret had understood too. "You've kept this going on grit," she said. "That's the truth, but there's more here than you've been letting yourself see." I looked at those numbers for a while. She was right. I could see that she was right. "Why didn't I see it?" I said, mostly to myself. She looked at me. "Because you've been fighting to survive it instead of running it. Those are different jobs and they take different eyes." She tapped the page. "You've been so busy keeping the thing alive that you couldn't step back far enough to see what it actually was." She tore the piece of paper out of her notebook and set it in front of me. 3 items, written clean, with the numbers beside each one. "Those 3 things," she said. "Do those 3 things before spring and this place turns a proper profit. Not maybe, not if the weather holds actually turns." I looked at the list, then I looked at her. "You figured this out in 3 evenings," I said. "I've kept books a long time," she said. "I've run this ranch 22 years, I said, "and I didn't see it." She reached across the table and tapped the list. "You weren't looking for it. You were looking at the ground right in front of your feet. Sometimes you need someone standing at a different angle." I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. "Stay," I said. She looked at me. "I mean for good, I stopped." I was 53 years old and I hadn't said this kind of thing in a long time and I wasn't sure I remembered how. "I mean that I'd like you to stay, if that's something you could want. We can work out what it looks like." She didn't answer right away. She closed the ledger and set her pencil down and looked at me for a long moment, not making me wait, just thinking, the way she always thought, actually considering something before she answered it. I respected that about her. She didn't say things she didn't mean. "Tell me one thing," she said. "All right. Those people in the valley who think poorly of you, does it matter to you what they think? Not should it matter, does it actually, when you're honest about it?" I thought about that. The feed merchant and his careful politeness. The Dentons and their 2 years of silence. The way a small valley keeps a tally on a man whether he likes it or not. "Less than it used to," I said. "Less all the time." She nodded, like that was the right answer, or at least an honest one. "I stayed in that rooming house in St. Louis for 2 years, she said. "Same day every day. I rode 29 days across bad country and a mountain pass in November because I was not going to spend the rest of my life in a room I'd already figured out." She paused. "I don't want something safe and finished. I want something that's still becoming something." "This ranch is still becoming something," I said. "I know," she said. "I've seen the bloodlines." I laughed. First time I'd laughed in I couldn't remember exactly how long, a real laugh, the kind that surprises you. She smiled at that, not a big smile, just the corner of her mouth and her eyes. "All right," she said. "We'll work out what it looks like. I want to tell you about the morning I understood what had happened to me. Not the morning she came back. That was the day things changed. This was different later, about 6 weeks in. It was late winter by then, cold, but the killing cold had mostly passed. We'd been up since before light because one of the mares was close and we'd both been watching her. She was a first-time dam and they're unpredictable. Some of them take it easy, some of them fight it the whole way. This one was restless, walking the stall, lying down and getting back up, and I'd been going out every hour to check her since midnight. Around 3 in the morning Nora had come out without being asked and just stayed, which was the right call because at 5 the mare went into real labor, and having 2 sets of hands made it better. The foal came at dawn, clean birth, good strong foal, dark bay with 1 white sock. We got him up and nursing, and then we stood there in that lamplight watching it, steam coming off the mare's flanks in the cold, the foal working to get his legs sorted out, finding his feet. The barn was warm from the animals and the lantern threw yellow light on everything. Nora was close enough that her shoulder was against my arm. She didn't move away, and neither did I. She didn't say anything, neither did I. And I thought, this is what I stopped letting myself want. This exact thing. Not a grand thing, a foal up and nursing and a woman standing beside me who sees the same thing I see when she looks at it. Who's been up since midnight because the mare needed watching and who'd stay till noon if the foal needed it. Who knew without being told when to come and when to stay back. I'd had it before with Margaret in the early years, and when I lost it I'd decided, not in any one moment, just slowly, the way a fire goes out when you stop feeding it, that it wasn't something I was going to get again, that the arithmetic didn't work in my favor, that I was the kind of man who got one good stretch, and then that was his life, and the decent thing was to stop grieving what the arithmetic said you couldn't have. I'd been wrong about that. She felt me shift and looked up at me. She had a streak of something on her jaw, hay or grime from the night's work. I couldn't tell in that light. I reached up and brushed it off with my thumb, slow, and she let me and looked at me with those straight eyes. "You all right?" she said. "Yeah," I said, "I'm all right." She looked back at the foal. "He's going to be something." "He is," I said. And that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. The valley talk changed through spring. Not all at once, and not because anyone announced anything. It changed because of what the ranch was doing. 3 foals that season, all of them out of the mares I'd been building toward for years, and the word got around about the bloodlines the way it does in a small valley where everyone knows what everyone else's horses look like. You can't fake a good horse. You can fake a lot of things, but not that. People who know horses look at a foal, and they know what they're looking at. And what they were looking at that spring was the result of 11 years of careful selection. The result of staying with it when it would have been easier to stop. The Denton Ranch sent a man out in April to look at a colt. He bought the colt. He came back in May and bought a filly and was polite enough not to mention the 2 years of silence, and I was polite enough not to mention it either. We talked about bloodlines and pasture conditions and the likelihood of a dry summer, and that was fine. Nora had written to the grain operation in the valley by then and gotten us set up on a contract. She'd renegotiated the breeding fees, quietly, no announcement, just changed what was on the paper when people asked. Nobody argued because the horses spoke for themselves. She'd also started keeping a foaling register, tracking dates and weights and early movement assessments on each foal, things I'd kept in my head but never written down. Buyers liked that. It made the operation look like what it was. The feed merchant in town, the one who'd gone polite and careful with me, started being chatty again sometime in March. I noticed it and I didn't say anything to Nora, but she noticed it too. She noticed most things. One afternoon in May we rode into town together on some errand. I've forgotten exactly what, probably supplies and a stop at the post office. She rode next to me on the gray mule, and the merchant came out to help us load and talked enough for 3 men, cheerful about everything. On the ride back she said, "He likes you more now." "He likes the business," I said. She shook her head a little. "He likes you more now. People do that. They decide how they feel about someone and then they look for evidence. You gave them better evidence." "The horses gave them better evidence." "The horses you bred," she said, "over 11 years, that you didn't sell when the arithmetic was bad." She glanced at me. "Your stubbornness, actually." I thought about that. The 2 years I'd sold down and started over. The years I'd kept the string going when a sensible person might have cut losses. The particular bloody-mindedness of staying with a thing that had stopped making obvious sense. "Stubbornness has a better name when it works out," I said. "It does," she said. "People call it steadiness." I looked at her. She was watching the trail ahead, that easy way she had on the mule, one hand loose on the reins. "You told me those people were wrong about me," I said. "That first morning, before you knew much of anything." She thought about that. I'd watched you 5 days. That wasn't enough to know. It was enough to see, she said. There's a difference. She paused. I know how to watch a man work. You can learn a lot about someone that way, more than they'd tell you if you asked. I didn't say anything. You weren't careless, she said. You weren't reckless or lazy or giving up. You were tired. That's a different thing. Tired people make it look the same from the outside, but it isn't. She'd seen that. In 5 days, she'd seen that. And she'd said those people were wrong before I'd given her any reason except what she'd seen for herself. Thank you, I said. First time I'd said that to her plainly. She looked at me sideways from under that big hat. You don't need to thank me for seeing clearly. I do, though, I said, because I'd stopped seeing it myself. She was quiet for a moment. The mule clipped along steady. Margaret sounds like she saw clearly too, she said. She did. Good, she said. Then you've been seen by 2 people who weren't wrong about you. That's more than a lot of men get. I didn't trust myself to answer that. I looked at the trail and the mountains and the long grass bending in the May wind, and held what she'd said where I could feel it. We married in June. Not a big occasion, a few people we both liked, the preacher from the little church on the West Road, the kitchen table after with whatever Nora decided to make, which was a good deal better than anything the hotel in town put on for celebrations. Jed Holt, Cal's nephew who'd taken over the empty place, came and brought a bottle of something decent. A woman named Prout from the valley who Nora had gotten to know over the winter and who was sharp and funny, and had strong opinions about which ranchers in the area were doing it right, and which ones were fooling themselves. The preacher drank 2 cups of coffee and ate 3 biscuits and talked mostly about the territory's history, which turned out to be his hobby, and Nora drew him out about it because she'd read the book. Small right. I remember Nora that afternoon in a blue dress she'd made herself from cloth she'd ordered in January, ordered it before anything was settled between us. She told me later, because she'd decided to stay before she said so out loud. That was Nora. She decided things carefully, and then she didn't go back on them. She'd looked at this place and looked at me and made a decision and ordered blue cloth and made a dress and waited to tell me because she thought I should come to it in my own time. I've thought about that a fair amount, the fact that she decided first. There's something a man has to do with that kind of knowledge, that a woman looked at what he was, took her time about it, thought it over honestly and without illusions, and decided yes. You have to decide what to do with it. Some men I think would feel reduced by it, like the choosing diminished them somehow, like they should have been the one to choose first, or to have been so obviously worth choosing that there was no deliberation required. I don't feel that way. I feel the opposite. I was a 53-year-old man with bad knees and a mortgaged ranch and 15 years of silence, and a back room full of things I'd stopped letting myself want. That she looked at all of that and took the time to read the ledgers and watch me work and then quietly ordered blue cloth, that's not a small thing. That's a thing I carry. She stood next to me at the window after everyone had gone, and the evening was settling in, gold light going over the south pasture. She put her hand in mine, easy, like she'd been doing it for years, the warmth of it. I felt the weight of it in the way you feel a thing that's been missing a long time and then comes back, not the same as before, different, its own shape, but recognizable. Something you know even when you thought you'd forgotten it. 22 years, she said. Yep. You built something. We're building something, I said. She squeezed my hand. Outside the window the mares were moving through the pasture in the evening light, unhurried, the good slow movement of well-kept horses, and the foals were among them, the 3 I'd been most proud of that season. The dark bay colt moved the best, long-strided, easy, already carrying himself like he knew what he was worth. His dam was the mare I'd paid too much for 4 years ago, the one I'd known what she'd throw and been right about. She moved with him through the long grass, and he stayed close the way good foals do, still learning where the edge of safety is. Nora was watching them too. I could feel her watching, the small movements of her attention as she tracked the foals, same thing she'd been doing since the day she rode in. "The bay colt," she said. "He's the best one." "I know," she said. "I've known since February." Of course she had. She leaned her head against my shoulder. One small movement, easy and decided, no performance in it. I put my arm around her and she fit there the way things fit when they're right, not perfectly, not without adjustment, but correctly. Like the thing was always supposed to be that way. The summer that followed was the best working summer I'd had on that ranch in many years, and I want to be accurate about why. It wasn't that the work was easier. If anything, there was more of it. The foaling register Nora had started meant better tracking, but more detail to keep. The new grain contract required correspondence I wasn't used to, and the Denton business expanding meant more horses going out and more people coming through to look. The work was bigger than it had been. What was different was that I was running it instead of surviving it. That's the word she'd used. She'd said those are different jobs, and she was right. And for the first time in years I was doing the first one. In the evenings we'd sit at the kitchen table after supper, and she'd tell me what she'd noticed in the pasture that day, and I'd tell her what I'd been thinking about the breeding decisions for the fall, and we'd go back and forth on it. She had a good eye, and she wasn't shy about disagreeing with me when she thought I was wrong. She was usually right. I'd argued with her about the chestnut filly in April, whether to breed her the following spring or wait another year, and Nora had said wait, the filly wasn't settled in her movement yet. You'll get a better foal from a settled dam. I'd thought she was being overly cautious. I waited anyway. By September I could see she was right. The filly moved better and better through the summer, found her stride, and by fall she was something you'd actually breed toward. "You should have bet me on that," Nora said when I told her. "What would I have bet?" She thought about it. "A month of doing the dishes," she said. "You'd have won." "I know," she said. "That's why I'd have bet it." That was how she was. Steady and sharp and not particularly modest about either one, which I liked. Margaret had been similar in her own way, a different temperament, softer in how she said things, but the same quality of seeing clearly and not apologizing for it. I thought sometimes about what the two of them would have made of each other. I think they'd have gotten on. I think they'd have found the common ground pretty quickly, which would have been horses and ledgers, and a certain clear-eyed approach to what things were actually worth. Autumn came and the valley went golden, and the aspens on the upper slopes turned and then dropped, and the cold started moving back in from the north. I'd put up enough hay. The horses were in good condition going into winter. The ledger was better than it had been in 6 years. One evening in October I found myself sitting at the desk looking at the numbers, the real numbers, what the year had actually done. I sat there for a while. Then I got up and went to find Nora. She was in the barn, checking on the pregnant mare. She had the lantern on the hook and she was standing at the stall door looking in, arms folded on the top rail, patient. The mare looked back at her. They'd developed a relationship, those two. The mare had been wary of Nora in the beginning the way mares are with strangers, and Nora had simply waited her out, showed up every evening, stood at the rail, didn't push. After about 3 weeks the mare had walked to the rail on her own, and Nora had held her hand out flat and let the mare decide. After that they'd been easy with each other. I stood in the barn door for a moment watching her before she heard me. "How's she doing?" I said. "Good," Nora said. "She's restless but not worried, another few weeks." I came and stood next to her at the rail. "I looked at the books," I said. She looked at me. "The year," I said, "what the year did." She waited. "You were right," I said, "about all 3 things, the grain contract, the fees, the mares, all 3. She nodded. "Not I told you, not any satisfaction in it, just, yes, that's what the numbers said." "We're in the black," I said. "Actually in the black, not barely, not if you count it a certain way, actually." She was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. 22 years, I said. I've never had a year that looked like this one." She turned to look at me then, and she had that straight look, but there was something else in it too, something warm. "You've been doing most of the right things for a long time," she said. "You just needed the rest of the picture." I looked at her in that lamplight. 53 years old, bad knees, a ranch I'd nearly lost twice, standing in a barn in October with a woman who'd ridden 29 days to get here, and then come back when she didn't have to, who'd read my ledgers in 3 evenings and seen what was there, who'd stood at a mare's rail every evening for 3 weeks until the mare decided to trust her. "You came back," I said. It wasn't what I'd planned to say, it was just what was there. She knew what I meant. "Of course I did," she said, like it was simple, like it had never been in question. I reached out and tucked a piece of hair back from her face where it had come loose, and she let me, and she looked at me with those eyes. "You came back 9 days later with all my horses and a list," I said. She smiled. The real one, not just the corner of her mouth. "3 items," she said. "That's not a list, that's a plan." I laughed and she laughed, and the mare looked at us both like we were being foolish, and maybe we were. I think about that morning a lot now. The cold coffee, the trail, watching nothing. The way my body went ahead of my mind when I heard them coming. 12 horses. And behind them, a woman on a gray mule who didn't know me, who had her own place to be, who stopped in my yard and said, "These yours," and then, when I couldn't put a sentence together, just told me straight that the mare was going to be fine. I'd built this ranch up from raw ground, lost it down to almost nothing and built it back. Kept it going through years when keeping it going was the whole job, all of it, nothing left over for anything else. And I'd gotten very good at believing the arithmetic I'd decided on, that I was the kind of man who got a certain amount and then no more, that the valley's quiet opinion of me was probably close enough to right, that the back room where I kept what I'd stopped letting myself want was properly closed, and I'd do well to leave it closed. Nora didn't believe that arithmetic. She looked at what was here, the horses, the ground, the ledger, the work, the years of it, and she said, "You built something," and she meant it. Not to be kind, because it was true. She said, "Those people are wrong about you," and she didn't say it to make me feel better. She said it because she'd spent 5 days watching and she'd seen what she'd seen. She rode 9 days to Caldwell Wells and 9 days back, not because I asked her to, but because she'd decided on her own, in her own way, that this was the place, and I was who she was going to stay with. I used to wonder sometimes why she came back. I know why. She told me why, plainly, the way she said everything. She wanted something that was still becoming something. She didn't want a room she'd already figured out. But I mean the other part of it, the part underneath. Why me specifically, this particular ranch, this particular worn-out man with the bad arithmetic and the back room full of things he'd stopped wanting? There were other ranches, other men in that valley who needed a good woman and probably deserved one. Why come back to the one who couldn't find his own horses in a storm? I think the answer is the horses themselves. Not the ones I lost, the whole string, the 11 years of careful decisions about which animal to breed to which and what you'd get if you thought it through properly. She saw that. She looked at those animals in the south pasture, and she saw 11 years of someone staying with a thing, seeing it clearly, making good decisions even when the surrounding circumstances were bad. You can't fake a good horse. You can fake a lot of things, but not that. And she knew how to read what she was looking at. She saw me in the horses before she saw me in much else. I've come to think that's a fine way to be known. She's out in the barn right now. I can see the lamp in the window from where I'm sitting. The big sorrel mare, the same one that caught her leg in the rock that November, the one Nora worked out slow and easy and then told me about like it was just the morning's business. She's due again, and Nora will sit with her until it's done. She always does. She has a way with the mares at night, something steady and quiet she brings in with her that the animals settle to. She doesn't talk to them the way some people do, doesn't make a lot of soft noise. She's just present. That's enough for them. It was enough for me too. I'll go out in a while. She won't ask me to. I'll just go, and she'll hear me come in, and we'll stand together the way we stood that February morning with the dark bay foal, shoulder to shoulder, watching what we've built move around in the lamplight. The feed merchant called me steadfast last week. Used that word exactly. I had to think about it on the ride home, where it had come from, whether it fit. 22 years on this ground. 2 bad stretches and 2 recoveries. The horses I kept building toward through both. Steadfast, maybe, or just too stubborn to understand when the arithmetic said stop. Nora was right about that too. It's the same thing, depends on whether it works out. The lamp in the barn window burns steady. That's what I see from here, that small square of yellow in all the dark. A good woman sitting with a horse that's close to her time, doing the patient work because the patient work is what it takes. In the morning there'll be a new foal or there won't. And if there is, she'll tell me about it at breakfast with that particular look she has when something has gone right. Just her eyes, mostly. She doesn't make a production of it. I've been seen by 2 people who weren't wrong about me. That's what she said. And she was right, and she is one of them. And I'm going to go out to that barn now and stand next to her in the lamplight and watch what happens. The arithmetic works out fine.